At my granddaughter's wedding, I noticed something that made my hands go still. My name wasn't on the family table. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and tell me where you're watching from. I've learned that sometimes distance makes the truth easier to see. I had always believed weddings were where families came together, where old wounds softened, where love, real love, was supposed to be visible in every detail. My granddaughter Emily's wedding was meant to be one of those days. A day I had looked forward to for over a year. A day I had quietly helped make possible. That morning I took my time getting ready. At 68 I no longer rushed for anyone. But I still cared. I chose a soft lavender dress, the one my late husband, Richard, used to say brought out the warmth in my eyes. I curled my silver hair carefully, pinned it just the way I used to for special occasions, and added a small pearl necklace he had given me on our 40th anniversary. You still clean up nice, I whispered to my reflection, imagining his voice behind me. For a moment I almost felt him there. The ceremony was held in a white chapel just outside town. Simple, elegant. Sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows, painting the aisle in soft colors as Emily walked down it, radiant in a lace gown that I had helped her choose months ago. She didn't look at me. Not once. I told myself she was nervous. Brides often are. My son Daniel walked her down the aisle, his posture straight, his expression proud. Beside him sat his wife, my daughter-in-law Karen, dressed in a tailored cream suit, her smile perfectly placed for every guest who glanced her way. When our eyes met, she gave me a small nod. Polite, distant, practiced. I smiled back. Of course I did. The ceremony passed in a blur of vows and applause. I clapped when everyone else did. I stood when they stood. I smiled when expected. If anyone had looked closely, they might have noticed how tightly I held my clutch, how carefully I controlled my breathing. But no one looked that closely. The reception was held at a grand hotel ballroom downtown. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting warm light over round tables dressed in white linen and gold accents. A string quartet played softly near the stage, and servers moved gracefully between guests carrying trays of champagne. It was beautiful. It was exactly the kind of wedding Emily had dreamed of, and I had paid for most of it. Not that anyone mentioned that. I approached the check-in table near the entrance, where a young woman with a bright smile was handing out name cards and directing guests to their seats. Name please, she asked cheerfully. Margaret Whitmore, I said. She flipped through the cards, her fingers moving quickly, confidently, until they slowed, then stopped. Her smile faltered just for a second. That's strange, she murmured, scanning again. Let me check another section. I waited. Around me, guests laughed and greeted each other, the room filling with the easy warmth of celebration. Someone brushed past me, the scent of expensive perfume lingering in the air. Glasses clinked. Music swelled. But at that table, time seemed to narrow into something quieter, tighter. I'm sorry, the young woman said finally, her voice softer now. I'm not seeing your name on the main seating list. I felt something cold settle in my chest. That's all right, I said gently. Perhaps it's under family? She hesitated. Then she checked again. This time she didn't speak right away. Instead, she reached beneath the table and pulled out a smaller stack of cards, plain without the gold trim the others had. She flipped through them more slowly, then pulled one out and handed it to me with an apologetic smile. There you go, Mrs. Whitmore. I took it. For a moment I didn't look down. I already knew. Still I lowered my eyes. Table 17. In the far corner of the room. Not with the family. Not even close. I nodded once. Thank you. She looked relieved, as if the problem had been solved. But problems like this don't solve themselves. They reveal themselves. I walked into the ballroom, holding the small card between my fingers. Each step felt measured, deliberate, controlled. Table 1 sat near the dance floor, positioned perfectly to view the stage. I recognized the faces immediately. My son, my daughter-in-law, Emily, her new husband, and a cluster of Karen's relatives, all laughing together as if the world had arranged itself exactly as it should. There was an empty chair beside Karen. For a brief, foolish moment I thought no. I stopped that thought before it could fully form. Instead I turned. Table 17 was exactly where I expected it to be. Near the back. Close to the service doors. A place where conversations were quieter, where no one important needed to look. I sat down. The chair was comfortable. The table was set the same as all the others, white linen, polished silverware, folded napkins shaped like roses. From a distance it all looked identical. Close it felt very different. I placed my clutch on the table and smoothed my dress, my movements calm, precise. A server approached and poured me a glass of champagne. "Congratulations," he said with a polite smile. "Thank you," I replied. I took a small sip. Across the room I watched my family. They were laughing. Karen leaned toward one of her sisters, whispering something that made them both smile. Daniel raised his glass in a toast. Emily beamed, her hand resting on her husband's arm. They looked complete, as if nothing and no one was missing. I let that image settle. I let it sink in fully without turning away. Because there's a moment when something breaks inside you where you have a choice. You can look away, or you can finally see. I chose to see. And as I sat there in the corner of a room I had helped create, watching a family I had built carry on without me, I smiled. Not because it didn't hurt, but because for the first time I understood exactly where I stood. And more importantly, what I was going to do next. I stayed at that table longer than I needed to. Not because I was enjoying myself, but because leaving too soon would have raised questions. And I wasn't ready for questions. Not yet. So I sat there quietly, folding my napkin across my lap, watching the room move around me as if I were invisible. From table 17, everything looked slightly different. The laughter from the family table didn't sound warm. It sounded distant. Rehearsed. Like a performance meant for everyone else. I noticed how Karen leaned in close whenever someone important approached, her hand lightly resting on their arm, her smile widening just a little more than necessary. She was good at that. She always had been. A woman at my table, someone I vaguely recognized from the groom's side, smiled politely at me. "Beautiful wedding, isn't it?" "Yes," I said. "It is." And it was. That was the strange part. Everything was exactly as it should be. The flowers were perfect. The music soft and elegant. The service flawless. Only one thing was out of place. Me. I glanced again toward table 1. My son hadn't looked in my direction once. Not during the speeches. Not during the toasts. Not even when the father-daughter dance ended and the room erupted into applause. It was as if I had already left. As if, in their version of this day, I had never been meant to be there at all. A server passed by with a tray of appetizers. I took one without thinking, then set it back down untouched. I wasn't hungry. I was remembering all the small moments that had led here. The times Karen had gently suggested changes, holidays rearranged, traditions updated, decisions made without asking me. Always with a smile. Always reasonable. And Daniel. He had gone along with it. Little by little. Quietly. I used to think it was just life moving forward. Now, sitting at the wrong table at my own granddaughter's wedding, I saw it for what it really was. A slow, careful repositioning. Not loud. Not cruel. Just deliberate. I picked up my glass again, turning it slightly in my hand, watching the light catch the surface. No scene. No confrontation. That wasn't my way. But something inside me had shifted. And this time I wasn't going to adjust. About 20 minutes later, I finally heard something that made everything clear. Not louder. Not dramatic. Just clear. I had stepped away from my table, more out of habit than intention. Sitting too long in one place makes people notice. Moving around makes you blend in. After years of hosting, organizing, smoothing over family gatherings, I knew how to disappear in plain sight. The hallway near the restrooms was quieter. Carpeted. Muted. The music from the ballroom softened into a distant hum. That's where I heard Karen's voice. "I told you she'd figure it out eventually," she said, low but sharp enough to carry. I slowed my steps. Another voice answered, one of her sisters, I think. "Then why invite her at all?" Karen let out a small laugh. "Because it would look worse if we didn't." There was a pause. The kind that settles heavy in the air. "And besides," she added, "it's better this way. She's difficult. Always. Has been." Daniel agrees. My fingers tightened slightly around my clutch. Daniel agrees. I didn't move. I didn't step closer. I didn't need to. The words had already reached exactly where they were meant to land. I mean, come on, the other woman said, her tone softer now, almost amused. Putting her at a side table? That's a bit much, even for you. Karen didn't hesitate. It's temporary, she said. After this, things will be simpler. Emily doesn't need that kind of influence around her. None of us do. Influence. That's what I had been reduced to. Not mother. Not grandmother. A presence to be managed. I stepped back before they could come out and see me. My reflection caught briefly in a mirror along the wall. Composed, steady, almost unchanged. Only my eyes looked different. I returned to the ballroom the same way I had left it. Quietly. Without drawing attention. No one noticed. Of course they didn't. I walked past table 1 again. This time I didn't pause. I didn't look for an empty seat that wasn't meant for me. I went back to table 17. Sat down. Folded my hands neatly in front of me. Across the room my family continued celebrating, untouched, unaware. But now I understood something I hadn't fully allowed myself to see before. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't oversight. It wasn't even carelessness. It was a decision. A deliberate one. And as I sat there, listening to the distant laughter that no longer felt like mine, something inside me settled. Cold. Quiet. Certain. They had already chosen their place for me. Now I would choose what came next. I sat there, hands folded, posture straight, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. When you reach a certain age, you don't need people to say things twice. You don't need explanations wrapped in polite words. You learn to read what's underneath. The pauses, the glances, the careful distance. And suddenly moments from the past begin to rearrange themselves. I looked down at the table setting in front of me, the polished silverware, the neatly folded napkin, and I remembered another table. Thanksgiving. 3 years ago. I had spent 2 days preparing dinner. Turkey stuffing, Daniel's favorite sweet potatoes. I remember checking the oven clock again and again, adjusting the temperature, making sure everything would be perfect. Karen had called that morning. Oh, Margaret, we decided to keep it small this year. Just immediate family. I had laughed softly. I am immediate family. There was a pause. Just a second too long. Well, you know what I mean. That year I ate alone. At the time I told myself it wasn't intentional. People get busy. Traditions change. They always had a way of making it sound reasonable. Then there was Emily's high school graduation. I had asked what time to arrive. Karen told me 3 p.m. When I got there, the ceremony was already ending. Families were hugging, taking pictures, celebrating moments I had missed. Oh no, Karen had said, hand to her chest. Did I say 3? I meant 1. I must have mixed it up. She smiled when she said it. I smiled back. Because that's what I did. I kept things smooth. I avoided conflict. I believed that keeping peace meant keeping family. Now, sitting at table 17, I saw it differently. Each misunderstanding. Each small change. Each moment where I was just slightly out of place. They weren't random. They were adjustments. Careful ones. Gradual. Like moving a chair inch by inch until no one remembers where it used to be. I lifted my glass again, taking a slow sip, letting the realization settle without resistance. Across the room, Karen laughed at something someone said, her hand resting lightly on Daniel's arm. He leaned toward her. Comfortable. Certain. Aligned. I watched them for a moment longer, then looked away. Not because it hurt, but because I no longer needed to convince myself of anything. For years, I had been trying to fit into a space that was quietly being taken from me. Now I understood. I hadn't been losing my place. It had been reassigned. And the worst part wasn't that it happened. It was that I had helped make it easy. It was sometime between the second course and the speeches that someone finally sat across from me. Mrs. Whitmore? I looked up. A man stood there, mid-60s, well-dressed but not trying too hard. There was something familiar about him, though it took me a moment to place it. Martin Reynolds, he said gently. Your husband's attorney. Of course. Richard had trusted him. Always said Martin was the kind of man who listened more than he spoke. And when he did speak, it mattered. Martin, I said, offering a small smile. I didn't know you'd be here. I wasn't sure I would be, he replied, taking the seat across from me. But I thought I should come. There was a pause. Not uncomfortable. Just intentional. His eyes flicked briefly toward table 1, then back to me. I saw the seating arrangement, he said quietly. I followed his glance, then returned my attention to my glass. It's a large wedding. These things happen. He didn't respond right away. Martin had never been a man for polite lies. Richard wouldn't have liked this, he said finally. The words landed softly, but they carried weight. I let out a slow breath. No, I said. He wouldn't have. For a moment neither of us spoke. The music filled the space between us, light and elegant, as if nothing in the room had shifted. But something had. I've been meaning to speak with you, Martin continued, lowering his voice slightly. I wasn't sure when the right time would be. I glanced at him. This doesn't seem like the right time. A faint smile touched his lips. No, he agreed. But sometimes the right time doesn't wait for the right setting. That sounded like Richard. My fingers rested lightly on the edge of the table. What is it, Martin? He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, not hurried, not dramatic, and pulled out a slim envelope. Cream-colored. Sealed. He placed it gently on the table between us, his hand lingering on it for just a second longer than necessary. Your husband updated some documents before he passed, he said. He asked me to hold on to this, unless certain conditions made it necessary. I didn't touch the envelope. Not yet. Conditions? I asked. Martin's gaze was steady. He was very clear, he said. If at any point you were treated as anything less than the center of this family, I was to give this to you. The room seemed quieter for a moment. Or maybe it was just me. I looked down at the envelope, then across the ballroom, at the laughter, the raised glasses, the table where I no longer belonged, then back at Martin. And what happens, I asked calmly, if I open it? He held my gaze. Then things, he said, will start to change. I nodded once. Slowly, carefully, and for the first time that evening, the smile that touched my lips wasn't for anyone else. It was for me. I didn't open the envelope right away. Instead, I placed my hand over it for a moment, then slid it calmly into my clutch. Thank you, Martin, I said. He studied my face, as if trying to read what I was thinking. But I gave him nothing more than a small, polite smile. I'll be in touch, I added. He nodded once. No questions. No pressure. That was something I had always appreciated about him. After he left, I sat there for a few seconds longer, feeling the weight of the envelope resting quietly at my side. Not heavy, just present. Across the room the speeches had begun. Daniel stood first. My son. He adjusted the microphone, cleared his throat and smiled out at the crowd. Confident. Comfortable. Exactly the man he had grown into. Family means everything to us, he said. I listened. Of course I did. He spoke about Emily, about how proud he was, about the journey that had led to this day. He thanked Karen's family for their support, their generosity, their love. There was laughter. Applause. He didn't mention me. Not once. I didn't react. I didn't lower my eyes or shift in my seat. I simply sat there, hands folded again, as if I were exactly where I was meant to be. Karen followed him. Her speech was polished, warm, carefully structured. She spoke about unity, about new beginnings, about the people who truly show up when it matters. That line drew a few nods from the table near the front. I watched her as she spoke. Her posture, her tone, the way she controlled the room. She had always been good at shaping narratives. And for years I had allowed myself to be edited out of them. I reached into my clutch, my fingers brushing lightly against the envelope. Still sealed. Still waiting. The applause rose again as Karen finished, the room glowing with approval. From the outside everything looked perfect. But perfection has a way of hiding fractures. And now I knew exactly where to look. I stood slowly, smoothing my dress as I did. No one stopped me. No one asked where I was going. I walked along the edge of the ballroom, not toward the exit, but toward something quieter. Place where I could think. Where I could decide. The hallway outside was empty again, the music fading. Behind me. I paused near a small table by the wall, set my clutch down and took out the envelope. For a moment I just looked at it. At the careful handwriting. At the seal that hadn't been broken. Richard had known. Not everything. But enough. I opened it. Carefully. Cleanly. Inside were a few sheets of paper. Legal. Precise. Signed. I read them once. Then again. Slowly. By the time I finished I didn't feel shocked. I didn't feel angry. I felt certain. I slid the papers back into the envelope, closed my clutch and lifted my head slightly. The music swelled again from inside the ballroom. Laughter followed. They were still celebrating. Still believing everything was exactly as they had planned. I took a steady breath. Then I turned back toward the room. This time I wasn't just a guest anymore. I walked back into the ballroom at the exact moment the music shifted. The first dance. Emily stood in the center of the floor, her hand in her husband's, the soft glow of the chandeliers catching the edge of her veil. The room quieted, guests turning their attention toward them, cameras lifting, smiles widening. It was a beautiful moment. The kind people remember. The kind I had imagined being part of. I stopped near the edge of the room, not too close, not too far. Close enough to see her face clearly. She looked happy. Untouched. For a brief second something inside me softened. Because no matter what had been done, she was still my granddaughter. And I had loved her long before any of this. But love, I realized, doesn't mean blindness. As the music played I let my gaze drift not just to Emily but to the people around her. Karen stood near the front, one hand resting lightly on Daniel's arm again. She leaned in slightly, saying something under her breath that made him smile. Comfortable. Certain. Unquestioned. That was the word that settled in my mind. Unquestioned. For years everything had gone unquestioned. Every change. Every quiet exclusion. Every small misunderstanding. Because I had allowed it. Because I had chosen peace over clarity. I shifted my grip on my clutch slightly, feeling the envelope inside. Not heavy. Just decisive. The music came to an end, and the room filled with applause. Emily laughed, her face glowing, as her husband spun her once more before, pulling her into a light embrace. More cameras. More smiles. Then the announcer's voice followed, cheerful and practiced. And now we invite the parents and close family to join the couple on the dance floor. There was movement immediately. Chairs sliding back. Dresses adjusting. Laughter rising again as people made their way forward. Daniel stepped out first. Karen beside him. A few others from her side followed. I stayed where I was. No one turned to look for me. No one gestured for me to come. It was subtle, but it said everything. I watched them gather around Emily, forming a circle that looked complete from the outside. A perfect frame. Carefully arranged. And I saw it clearly now, not just tonight but the pattern behind it. Who was included? Who was centered? Who was quietly left out? I took a slow breath, letting it settle fully without resistance. Then without hesitation I turned, not toward the exit, not toward my table, but toward the front of the room. Toward the stage. My steps were steady. Measured. Intentional. A few heads turned as I passed. Not many. Just enough. I didn't rush. I didn't stop. Because for the first time that evening, I wasn't waiting to be invited anymore. By the time I reached the stage, the music had already faded into the background. Most people were still focused on the dance floor, on Emily, on the laughter, on the version of the family that looked whole from a distance. I stepped up quietly. No announcement. No invitation. Just presence. The microphone stood slightly to the side, left there after the last speech. I paused for a moment, letting my hand rest lightly against the podium, feeling the smooth surface beneath my fingers. Familiar. Grounding. A few guests near the front began to notice. Conversations softened. A ripple of attention, small at first, then growing. Karen saw me. I could tell by the way her posture changed just slightly. Her smile didn't disappear, but it tightened at the edges. Controlled. Daniel followed her gaze. For a second he looked confused. Then uncertain. I didn't look at them for long. Instead I adjusted the microphone gently, not rushing, not hesitating. The soft feedback hum drew more eyes toward me, more silence into the room. I won't take much of your time, I said. My voice was calm. Steady. Not loud but it carried. I just realized sitting back there, I paused, letting the words settle naturally, that I haven't said anything tonight. A few polite smiles appeared in the crowd. Expectant. Unaware. I suppose that makes sense, I continued. It's easy to forget someone who's been quietly moved out of the picture. Now the room shifted. Not dramatically. Just enough. I let my gaze move across the faces. Friends, strangers, family. Then rested it briefly on Emily. She looked at me confused. Not guilty. Not yet. I softened my expression just for her. Emily, I said gently, you look beautiful tonight. A small smile touched her lips. Because she still didn't understand. I straightened slightly, one hand resting against the edge of the podium, the other holding my clutch. Still closed, still containing everything they didn't expect. I helped plan this wedding, I said. Not for recognition, but because I believed I was part of this family. Silence now. Real silence. And tonight, I added quietly, I learned exactly where I stand. I paused. Just long enough. Not to create drama, but to make sure every word had somewhere to land. I let the silence stretch just a moment longer. Not to embarrass anyone. Just long enough for the truth to settle in the room. Then I opened my clutch. Slowly. No sudden movements. No raised voice. Just the soft sound of paper sliding free. I wasn't going to say anything tonight, I continued. That was my first instinct. Smile, sit quietly, and let the evening pass the way it was designed to. A few people shifted in their seats. Karen didn't move, but her eyes were locked on the envelope in my hand. But something changed, I said. I unfolded the papers carefully, glancing down. Not because I needed to read them again, but because I wanted them to see that I could. That I had. My husband, I said, my voice steady, was a thoughtful man. He believed in preparation, in making sure things were handled properly. I lifted my gaze. He also believed in respect. Now Daniel moved. Just slightly. A step forward. Uncertain. Before he passed, I continued. He made a few decisions. Quiet ones. Legal ones. The word legal landed differently. I saw it ripple. Karen's expression didn't break, but it sharpened. He asked his attorney to hold on to certain documents, unless it became necessary to share them. I paused again. Not for effect. For clarity. And, tonight, I said softly, made it necessary. The room was still now. Completely. I held the papers lightly in my hand. No one needs to guess what this is, I added. But I think it's only fair that the people who decided where I belong understand what that decision costs. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply turned slightly, just enough to face Daniel and Karen directly. And for the first time that evening, they weren't in control of the room anymore. Daniel was the first to speak. Mom, what is this? His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Not confident. Not steady. Just unsure. I didn't answer right away. I let him sit in that question. Because for once I wasn't the one rushing to make things comfortable. Karen stepped forward next, her heels clicking softly against the floor. She didn't look at me, she looked at the room. At the guests. At the image. Always the image. I think this isn't the time for confusion, she said smoothly, her tone warm but controlled. We can talk about whatever this is later, privately. Privately. Of course. That's where things like this were meant to stay. Hidden. Managed. Rewritten. I shook my head once. Calm. Certain. No, I said. I don't think later would change anything. A few murmurs moved through the room now. Subtle but growing. Daniel glanced at Karen, then back at me. Mom, please, you're making a scene. I almost smiled. Because that word scene told me everything. Not concern. Not confusion. Just discomfort that something unscripted was happening. I didn't plan to, I replied gently. But neither did you. That landed. I lifted the paper slightly, not dramatically, just enough. These documents, I said, outline the final structure of everything your father built. The house. The accounts. The investments. Silence again. Heavier this time. And more importantly, I added, they outline the conditions under which those things remain where they are. Karen's expression shifted. Just a fraction. But I saw it. That was the moment she understood this wasn't just emotion. This was control. Daniel took another step forward. Mom, whatever this is, we can fix it. You don't have to. I'm not trying to fix anything, I said quietly. And I meant it. I'm simply honoring what was already decided. I let my gaze rest on them both. Not angry. Not hurt. Just clear. You made your decision. Tonight, I continued. About where I belong. A pause. Then softer. So now this will make sure everything else follows that decision. No raised voice. No accusation. Just truth. And this time there was no way to move me quietly out of the picture. No one spoke right away. That was the first thing I noticed. For a room that had been filled with laughter just minutes ago, the silence now felt different. Not empty. Heavy. Daniel stood there, his mouth slightly open, as if he was searching for the right words, and realizing too late that he didn't have them. Karen didn't move. But her posture had changed. The ease was gone. The control she carried so effortlessly before. It was slipping just enough to be seen. You're overreacting, she said finally. Calm. Measured. But not as steady as before. This is a wedding, she added. Not the place for legal discussions. I looked at her. Really looked this time. For years I had avoided that. I had softened things in my own mind, given her the benefit of doubt, explained away what didn't feel right. Not anymore. You're right, I said quietly. It's not the place. A small shift moved through the room, people leaning in, listening more closely. That's why I didn't bring this up earlier, I continued. That's why I sat at the table I was given and watched. Daniel swallowed. Mom! I raised my hand slightly. Not to stop him harshly. Just enough. I watched who mattered, I said. Who was included? Who wasn't? No anger. Just observation. And I realized something very simple. I let the words settle before finishing. I'm not part of this family in the way I believed I was. That landed harder than anything else. Because it wasn't loud. It was true. Karen crossed her arms lightly. A small defensive gesture she probably didn't even realize she made. That's not what this is, she said. But her voice didn't carry the same certainty. It is, I replied. And that's all right. That was the part that unsettled them. Not resistance. Not pleading. Acceptance. I'm not here to argue, I added. Or to convince anyone to see me differently. I lowered the paper slightly, my grip relaxed. I'm just making sure that from this point forward, everything reflects that reality. Daniel took a step closer. But stopped. Because for the first time he didn't know how to reach me anymore. I didn't wait for another response. There was nothing left to clarify. I folded the papers carefully, the same way I had unfolded them. Steady hands, no hesitation, and placed them back into my clutch. The room remained still. Not frozen. Just changed. I stepped away from the microphone. No rush. No dramatic exit. Just one quiet step, then another. As I walked past Daniel, he reached out slightly, then stopped himself. His hand hovered for a second before falling back to his side. Mom, he said again. Softer this time. But I didn't turn. Not because I didn't hear him. Because I had already listened for too many years. I passed Karen next. She didn't speak. Didn't move. Her eyes followed me, sharp, calculating, but for the first time there was something else there. Uncertainty. I didn't acknowledge it. There was nothing left to manage. As I moved through the room, people shifted subtly to make space. Conversations didn't resume right away. Glasses stayed in hands untouched. They were watching. Not the woman at table 17, but the one walking away from the front. I reached the doors of the ballroom and paused for just a moment. Not to look back. Just to take one steady breath. Behind me, the music hadn't started again yet. The celebration had paused, caught somewhere between what it had been and what it now understood itself to be. I opened the door and stepped into the quiet hallway. The sound of the reception softened instantly. Distant. Fading. I walked slowly toward the exit, my heels steady against the floor, my reflection passing briefly in the glass along the wall. The same lavender dress. The same pearl necklace. Nothing had changed on the outside. But everything had shifted within. When I stepped outside, the evening air was cool, calm, real. For the first time that day, I didn't feel out of place. I felt clear. They thought I was just an old woman sitting at the wrong table. Someone easy to move, easy to forget. They were wrong, because I wasn't part of the picture they had arranged anymore. And that meant they no longer had any control over where I stood. I walked to my car without looking back, started the engine, and drove away, not as someone who had been pushed out, but as someone who had finally chosen to leave.